Well, good evening. It is 6 o'clock on January 14th, 2025, and I'm calling this Lacey City Council work session to order. Councilmember Greenstein is excused tonight, but all the council is present. I also want to acknowledge that we, the City of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and the Squax Indian tribe. And I also like to mention that former Deputy Mayor Cynthia Pratt's in the room, and it's good to see you, Cynthia. I know she's busy, but she's representing the sort of the Parks Foundation here. So, with that, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Then that motion unanimously carries. We have an adopted agenda. Next up on our approved agenda is a public comment. We received 57 written public comments, and we have one person who has registered to speak via Zoom. And let's bring him in now. And can you please introduce yourself? And you have 3 minutes.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yep, thank you.
My name is Jeff Prevost. I'm here representing the Thurston County Pickleball Club. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on the expansion of pickleball inclusion for people of all ages. Our issue is with the tennis court resurfacing project not making the list for these priorities for the projects that need to be undertaken. The reason that we're concerned about that is the tennis courts are a very important part of our mission in that our club offers free lessons every Saturday for beginners and intermediate players who are looking to get into the sport. And we use the tennis courts for those. We also use the tennis courts for all of the tournaments that we hold at Rainier Vista, which is 5 throughout the year. And these tournaments are large. It's the second and third largest tournament in the state for pickleball. The importance of that for us is in that the condition of the tennis courts is really starting to fail. There's cracks all over the place. The surface is failing. We've been, talking to the parks people for a couple of years now, just discussing the importance of making some repairs or improvements or resurfacing those tennis courts so we can continue to have our events there. As the condition exists now, it creates a real safety issue. Some of the cracks are getting rather large. We've got a trip and fall, situation that's very present, creates risk for our club, creates risk for the city. And I think there's significant consequences if something isn't done about it. The Washington State Senior Games, which is held at this venue, has been concerned about the conditions of these courts and continuing to put their senior members into a tournament on these courts. And without having, with the tennis courts, we can offer 20 courts for a tournament. Without them, we've only got 4 and potentially 4 more to come if that all gets approved and funded. We have written a letter that includes a few options. We're more than willing to participate in the cost of resurfacing or repairing these courts professionally. The city of Lacey has tried to do this with their own resources over the last couple of years, and it really has not worked well. In some cases, there's more risks on those courts now after the repairs than there was before. The surface is very uneven. So I think it's something that at a minimum needs to be undertaken professionally. But I think in an ideal situation for this event to continue to grow and prosper the way that it has for our club and for the city of Lacey, there's going to need to be a complete resurfacing of these courts at some point in the very near future. So that is my comment.
So much. And good news is no decisions have been made yet on any final ranking, so we'll be discussing that, and we'll be discussing other rankings as we go forward. So thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else wishing to address the council? Okay, then let's go on to our main agenda item for today, which is our Parks Improvement Funding Work Group recommendation. Turn it over to Jen and Rick and Troy.
So, thank you, Mayor. And tonight is the follow-up meeting from the official handoff to council of the Parks Improvement Funding Work Group's recommendation that occurred back at your December 17th council meeting of last year. And the premise of that conversation was do the official handoff and try a high-level overview and kind of get a sense of council questions, comments, and what you'd like to focus on for today's conversation. So this is the second part, as I mentioned, and tonight we're going to go into a little bit more detail of the recommendation, specifically to their primary recommendation related to the Metropolitan Parks District. However, trying to create this is that there's a lot of pieces to this topic and a lot of kind of decision points within the larger decision. So we want to try to frame this conversation tonight in about several different chapters. So as you look at the agenda we have up on the screen, we're going to start out with somewhat how did we get here, and talk about some of the existing or current parks and culture and recreation funding, the community engagement that we've occurred over the last since 2020, and what we've heard from the public as to what they would like to see in our parks. And then also go through the work group recommendations and kind of re-summarize what those are. Then we want to get into talking about the priorities that come out, as we just heard from the public comment tonight. What are those? We currently have the current the Parks Improvement Capital Improvement Plan, and on there are several different projects. I think between the new and replacement projects totals about $72 million. So the work group, we'll go through what the work group recommendation in terms of prioritizing that list or putting those lists in an order. And then once we go through that and go into detail of some of those projects and answer council questions, then we want to take a pause and have council talk about that priority list and either and look if there's any changes that council want to see or explore or have further questions or conversations. After that section, then we'll go into what is a Metropolitan Park District, and this is where we'll talk a little bit more about the structure and framework of a park district and options that it entails, and then talk about the property tax levy, the recommended amount that the work group said is needed to fund the parks, culture, and recreational needs for the community over time. And then we'll take a pause there and talk about the funding levels and what that means in terms of a rate for the taxpayers. Have the council talk about that and kind of give some guidance on what they want to see in terms of a funding level if you decide to move forward with the Metropolitan Park District. And then finally, once we get those two conversations done related to priorities and funding levels, then we'll talk a little bit about the potential ballot measure and potential timing of an election, and look at the pros and cons of election dates out in the future. So before I get into it, is there any question at this point of what we're trying to do tonight? One of the things we want to try to make sure there's questions and dialogue while we go through the presentation, but also we want to make sure that we kind of hit those three marks so that we can move through the conversation today and get some direction from council at the end of the night of where you want staff to start preparing going forward. So first, I just want to talk about the current funding structure for parks in general, and this is kind of why we started this process and why the council wanted to form this work group that's been a meeting over for the last 6 months to develop some funding recommendations. The current funding structure for our park, culture, and recreational program, as you see on the screen, far left column, we spent about $7.6 million in park, culture, and recreation expenses. And then that's made up of revenues that support that expenditures of a combination of parks and users fees, which you see located in the green band down at the bottom of the left-hand column, of about $850,000. And then the rest of that's made up of general fund expenditures of $6.8 million. And you move over to the next column in the middle, that's the funding structure for the current regional athletic complex. As you can see, total expenditures to operate and maintain the RAC is about just under $1.5 million. And then again, that's made a combination of user fees of the RAC facility but most of that is made up of, or 2/3 of that is made up of other funds coming in to support the RAC operations. And that fund, that $921,000 is made up of about $400,000 out of PFD reserves, as well as this year, I think $188,000 out of LTAC dollars to help support the RAC in addition to the user fees for that facility. And of course, our other component of Parks and Recreation is our community buildings and facilities, like the Woodland Creek Community Center and the Senior Center and those type of things. And you can see there that the current operation expenses is about just over $1.1 million. And again, it's made up of combination of user fees, but mostly it's supported by the general fund activities and reserves to continue operation and maintenance. So as we look at that, and it's working right now as we're status quo, but as we look at the Parks Capital Improvement Program and what we heard from the community about parks expansion, completing unfinished parks that are out throughout our area, adding other types of amenities, meeting new trends for recreational purposes. This funding structure is something we need to look at as how we continue forward to be a sustainable structure that we can continue to be relevant to our community and meet their needs that they see in terms of their use of the parks, culture, and recreational programs. So again, going back, that's one of the purposes of the work group was to kind of look at different options and make some recommendations to council how to proceed to create a sustainable funding source to continue to expand and enhance our parks programs. Another piece of our funding programs, of course, is reserves. And this is this slide is just to really indicate the 2025 budget of what we're using reserves for, maintenance and operation facilities, repair of equipment. So as we have aging infrastructure, we continue to need to make sure we're maintaining that infrastructure so that it's in good repair and doesn't evolve into a total replacement. So this is just, again, to demonstrate that in addition to operation and general maintenance, we also have replacement and repairs programs. And in 2025, we're allocating just over $1 million just for dock replacement, replacing the bridge in Woodland Creek Community Park, sand and sealing hardwood floors, community center that gets a lot of use, so that creates a high level of cost, carpet replacement, roof replacement, and as well as vehicle replacements. So that's generally the current funding structure and the circumstance we're in. And tonight, we're just going to talk about how we go forward. But first, before we do, I want to turn this over to Jen, who can talk about some of the community engagement activities we've had over the past several years and what we heard from the community through that effort.
Now, thank you, Rick. And I also want to thank Jenny Wilson for being here. She's our senior parks planner, and Jamie Oakland, who is the parks maintenance supervisor, here as well tonight. So just, obviously wanting to acknowledge that the work we do is ultimately for the community. And so of utmost importance and critical that community outreach, play a large role in the development of the comprehensive plan update. And so this is a snapshot of what we've been doing since council had asked us in 2020 to close some communication gaps that might be existing within the community, between us and the community. So in 2021, there was open-ended community outreach. You'll remember the Lacey Cares, and we were pleasantly surprised, and I guess maybe not too surprised, but 6,000 inputs were related to parks, culture, and recreation. That was just, a huge thing that, and a lot of times people really choose to live in Lacey because of the parks and the park system and programs that we offer. Then in summer of 2021, we were able to hire a consultant to help us create an outreach team to understand community priorities and preferences. They went out into the community and received 800 more community inputs. We then conducted a more specific Parks and Recreation survey using preliminary findings, and that's the one that the consultant helped us with as well. We received 1,200 responses. It's the most, really this is the most response we've ever received in parks, and so super pleased with those, that participation. In 2022, we took what we heard and said, hey, this is what we heard, and we talked more specifically about locations and just confirming what those priorities were. Then fast forward to 2023, when the comp plan was approved by all the boards and by council, we did put together pretty informal, but a parks task force who represented different stakeholders in the community just to take a look at it one more time and provide their insights. And so top themes as articulated in the comprehensive plan are here on the screen. aquatics and indoor facilities, so indoor pool, spray parks, indoor playground. Another theme, trails and preservation of outdoor spaces, so access to and increased amounts of trails and outdoor spaces that folks can actually access. As you know, we have a lot of undeveloped space in Lacey. Outdoor facilities, the things that came to the top were disc golf, community gardens and food forest, pickleball, skate features and pump track, and playgrounds, of which we have many in Lacey. As we know, they're getting old and need replacement. Sports fields, what we heard is finish the ones already planned, so that's Meridian Park and RAC Phase 3, essentially, and then improve current fields to the extent possible to extend use with synthetic turf and lights. That just expands the amount of time that those fields can be used. And then, as you know, of course, like Rick mentioned, the last 6 months, August through December of '24, council had formed the work group, and the work group chair shared out at your December meeting what the recommendations were. And there was a primary recommendation of an MPD. We'll get to levy rates later in the interest of time and moving through this. Just want to do this as a touch point, and then we'll dive into it a little bit more. But after considering numerous funding options, the work group determined that the MPD, or Metropolitan Park District, was the most viable path forward for predictable and dedicated funding to manage, maintain, and improve Lacey parks. There's local examples of MPD success in other jurisdictions, and the work group encourages the Lacey City Council to draft a ballot measure for voter approval accordingly. They're recommending a 45-cent per thousand assessed value rate for year one, and then this would generate just under $6 million annually for parks. The cost to the homeowner would be approximately $225 in annual property tax. That's based on an average residential property assessment of $500,000. And then they also, since inflation will adversely affect the revenue generated from an MPD over the lifetime of the levy, they encouraged council to consider a phased increase up to the maximum levy rate. And then in addition to that main recommendation, and this will be repetitive for you, but just a reminder, they had additional input, continue a commitment to support Lacey Parks Culture and Recreation and Parks Maintenance through the city's general fund. Their intent is to generate additional funding for Lacey Parks. And then they asked that you consider the benefits and limitations of issuing debt. And then initially, they recommend 40% of funds generated allocated to maintenance and operation and 60% to new capital projects. And so since they thought that M&O was of such importance, they actually prioritized those parks capital improvement lists separately. One is the new capital projects and one is the M&O or replacement projects, and we'll get into that. They asked that you allow ample time for community education, look at existing park reserves, and then continue to seek other revenues. So I know we talked about this at the December 17th meeting, but other revenues, sponsorships, donations, grants, fees for use, state and legislature funding, and LTAC dollars, which we can definitely have a future conversation about LTAC. But the point here and what the work group determined is that all of these categories that I just listed, these other revenues, are supplementary in nature and not sustainable just on their own. And so that's why they recommended the MPD. So the PCIP, or Parks Capital Improvement Program, as you know, the work group was asked to rank these, and as I just said, there's two different lists. I do want to just give a quick note about this PCIP. It is located in our comprehensive plan as the initial PCIP. It's a culmination of the public input and user groups, and stakeholders, and staff all together. And I do want to highlight, particularly due to the public comment that we got tonight, that this was a snapshot in time, and I think that our maintenance and operation needs, you're going to see that the comment that came in just highlights the fact that there are emergent needs and ongoing needs. So essentially what we do with this PCIP is we get together with park maintenance every year and we update the PCIP. So it's a working document. The one we used for that the council had the work group focus on was, again, just that snapshot in time. So they're just recognize there's going to be ongoing needs. In fact, we have a bunch of playground replacements that aren't even on the maintenance list that are just around the corner, because we do have so many amenities. So just kind of keep that in mind. But the top 5, I thought we could take a little bit deeper dive on the top 5 from the ranking of the work group, since we didn't have time. And, you know, if there's something else you want to talk about on the list too, certainly. But we'll just kind of give an overview of the top 5. And I do want to point out that the work group thought that these top 5 projects could be accomplished with 5 years' worth of revenue without issuing debt, if the 45-cent per thousand value was assessed. So that's something to highlight here as well. So,
Also included, not only capital costs, but also ongoing maintenance, operation costs once it's built, correct?
yes, right, yes, thank you, good flag. I also want to point out, when you see Spray Park 1, Central Lacey, so some folks might look at this and think that we're talking about Midtown, but it's not. This was just language that was used in the comp plan to identify that, the Bucknell or school district site, Nisqually School District site. So for lack of a better term, it was called Central, but it's referring to that particular site in the partnership with them. So we'll start with Meridian Park. This popular park is unfinished, so just project overview. There's space for sports fields. You can see them circled on the screen there. That's been cleared. There's utilities that are stubbed to at least the main sports field in the middle there. But the park is not finished. So sports fields, there could be a skate feature that goes in, a pump track and/or possible pickleball courts. And so essentially with this project, there is a master plan. It is outdated, but we know that if you see the benefit and the need down below, we know that there is a sports field shortage, so there wouldn't be any reason not to do sports fields there. But with some of the other amenities, essentially, we would do like an update on the master plan and work with the community on which of these amenities would actually end up going in. So there's some options there.
Is this the park where the cricket request was made for?
There was a cricket request, yeah, made for that. Yeah, so under the benefit and need, just acknowledging that there's a park desert north of I-5. We've looked at the map and seen that there's really not a lot for folks up there. And particularly this next one, Northeast Lacey neighborhoods, you know, there's a lot of neighborhoods around this park. It's not a huge space. It's a very busy spot. It's desperately in need of additional amenities for all the neighborhoods that utilize this park space. There is a North Meridian Park, but it's completely undeveloped. It's that 5-acre parcel north. Yes.
So is that northwest corner of the defined red area, is that where the gas station and convenience store are supposed to be going in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Top left of the map, that vacant
Right.
parcel, yes.
Do any of these newer communities have any like smaller parks that they built into their areas?
Yes, with Meridian Campus Master Plan, there's a combination of park spaces set aside for public use, and then there also, within the neighborhoods, there's pocket parks and open space and buffers and tree areas, tree tracks.
So we would want to figure out an entrance that didn't fight with that, and that, how the park could be buffered. That,
There is already existing entrance on the north side of aligned with the driveway into the neighborhood to the north. And then I think there will be an additional consideration of interest on the street to the south.
Yeah, and so this actually has 2 of the projects that are on the list on this one slide. So there's the pickleball court skate feature and our pump track there you see at the top, and then the sports field development, which that number is higher. It includes planning and design for that sports field.
Is North Thurston, have they spoken about what their intentions are with their?
So not recently. I know the original concept was to be able to share, do some joint use there. So, yeah, it would be, part of this project would be obviously getting with them and determining what we could do together. Yeah, always looking for partnership opportunities.
They also have that property at Edgewater too, off Willamette, that's undeveloped.
But
Okay.
they have no intention on this being a future school site or anything. This is
It's kind of smaller.
It was originally a set aside for a future school site, but they're also, with different Roman trends now, there's nothing pressing to develop there at this point.
okay. And so that they might be open to doing additional fields and
Yeah.
a partnership?
Yes, I would think so.
Yep, and then, 2 of the top 5 projects also correspond to the Young Child and Family Center project, number 2 and number 3 on that list. And the first one is a spray park at that site. And so that's what the project would be, is the city providing that spray park and the M&O. So you can see the development estimate there with the maintenance and operation estimate there. That's an annual amount, yes?
That development cost is for an outdoor spray park?
Yes, yeah,
Obviously?
outdoor spray park, yep.
Okay.
And so the benefit and the need, spray parks are a great way for kids to engage in physical play and exercise. They provide access to water and offer opportunity to cool off in hot weather. And then spray parks are also a top theme from the public input.
But are we set on the thought that it needs to be an outdoor spray park? I'm wondering, is that?
Well, so aquatics and indoor facilities were one of the top themes. And so the spray park would fall under the aquatics part of this. So it would be an aquatics opportunity that's relatively low cost that people could access.
The next slide we'll talk about.
The next slide we're talking about.
Priority, which we'll talk about the
Yeah.
end.
One of the things that I was curious about as I was reviewing the recommendations was the timing. And the Young Child and Family Center strikes me as something that's kind of further out on the planning, design, development horizon, because we don't have all the funding yet. This would be a big piece of it, but it's not the Child and Family Center. So even though this would be a priority for us, how far out would we be from actually getting this built?
Yeah, so, well, the Young Child and Family Center, the school district portion is already started, and they're moving forward. And so this would be an additional phase to that project if the funding came through for this.
Well, there's not enough there for the full, like, indoor facility.
Yeah, so you're talking about the pool?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that'll be the next slide. Yep. Thank you for giving us that little segue there. Yeah, so this is a partnership with the Young Child and Family Center, with the North Thurston Public Schools and the YMCA. The recreation components of the project could include an indoor pool, indoor playground, or outdoor spray park and nature playground. The city would likely contribute toward the pool and/or indoor playground portion. So we have a $5 million placeholder in the Parks Capital Improvement Program. And I'll get to on the next slide just where we're at with that. But the benefits and need, something that the work group did prioritize and acknowledge is that the partnership piece that we mentioned so many times in the comp plan is one of the benefits of, together we can do more for the community if it's not just one agency, shouldering all the capital and all the M&O. So to kind of split that up and help create healthier communities. And then aquatics and indoor facilities, obviously being a top theme from public input. And if you go to the next slide, just a reminder that it's a phasable project. But where we're at right now is the 5 million placeholder would need to go specifically toward the indoor playground. And so currently, we're confirming, what could be built with that and whatever else the YMCA could bring in to make that indoor playground a reality. The pool
But
would be part of a
100%
future vision.
We're not 100% sure that the Y is actually going to be a partner in this. Though.
There's no guarantee, that's what
No.
sort of worries me about that.
So, Well, conversations that I've had and meetings recently, all point to the fact that the Y would be a partner. They're interested in operating a pool as well as the indoor playground. The challenge is, as you know, is that there is a funding gap for the pool. And so, basically, the pool would be the future, so the indoor playground would be just picture one original segment beyond the library of the indoor playground, and then the pool would get added later. So city could come in with those potential
Does that,
grants that we talked about to
does that
help
kind of mean
fund
we build it
capital.
and we pay for it and then they just run it and get the benefits of that, or how would that work?
What's the benefit for the Lacey community if we're putting this much money in and yet they still have to be a member of the Y and pay monthly dues?
Yeah, so they have a robust scholarship program, and from what conversations I've had with them is that they don't turn people away. So that would be, the benefit would be having a pool in Lacey that the city could pitch in, but the Y would operate it. And, because we know that M&O for us is
And as we get closer to that
Right.
and put the partnerships together, we'd have an interlocal agreement or a memorandum of understanding of how we would spell out the city's contribution, Y's contribution, school district's contribution, and then how we make it accessible to the public, especially the city residents. And that could be either through scholarships or a discount or those type of things that can create access to the Lacey community for the portion of city involvement in that project.
Yeah, I think with that agreement in place, I'd be much more comfortable with it because I want to make sure everyone has access.
Can you explain again how, like, just beyond the library, there would be what? I didn't catch that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the future recreation center would be phased. So essentially, if we can build the indoor playground and get people there using the site and the kiddos being active, then the pool, once the funding comes in for the pool, that's the kind of that longer-term vision. So the shorter term and then the longer term. It would just add on to that building.
So it'd add on to the front of the library?
The future rec.
Or the, okay, future rec center.
Future Rec Center, if you took
Okay.
a little slice, like, say, 7,500 square feet, if you're looking at, say you're looking at 30,000 square feet for that Future Rec Center, if you took 75,000, or excuse me, 7,500 square feet and built that portion first for an indoor playground, so that we can get the site active, more active, and get people in there.
Would we have that agreement in place before going out and asking people for money? That, that kind of
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the pieces too with the priorities project list. These are goals in the capital improvement program. If, say, an MPD was approved to be formed, we started collecting revenues, we wouldn't necessarily spend money towards that project, or we'd get to the point where we need to have the agreements in place before we would authorize moving forward into a design and construction phase. We'd need to have assurance of how that structure would look like.
So,
Yeah, because I think
Yeah.
it's all
And
something we want. We just don't want to tie up a bunch into it
Right,
and not go
but the
anywhere.
nice thing about that this priority list is, I think, number 3 on the priority, but also too, it's opportunity, and you have revenue sources come in that you can adjust as time goes on in terms for projects and what's ready and opportunity and what's long-term planning.
is this rendering, kind of more of an accurate rendering? The one we saw before this one, like a year ago, didn't look like this at all.
Yeah, so this is the one that the school district showed at the last joint work session
Yep.
with the school board, and they're working on an update to this one. So this is just the latest one that they have shared with the public.
I remember the one
Yeah,
before this.
but there's more coming on it, so. Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress, you start with the concept design, and so what they're trying to do right now is refine the concept.
And as these,
The next one will look different than this.
as these concepts are refined, are we talking about different costs and models and stuff like that? Are they increasing, decreasing, or does anybody know?
I think it's.
Yeah, I mean, costs increase every year.
Well, I remember the design before this, right? And it had like a cost projection of, I couldn't remember the exact number, I think it was 70. sort of
70
the
million,
ballpark, right?
Yeah.
And and when I saw this concept design, I don't remember there being a number attached to it. I guess what I'm wondering is this,
Yeah.
are we still operating off the premise that 70 is our number?
Correct, but also trying to do designs too that can reduce that cost, but also we're fighting that just inflationary cost of time before we actually realize the project in the future. But trying to design it so that we're minimizing cost and not adding, I guess, lack of a better phrase, more bells and whistles as we develop the concept designs. We want to try to make sure that we're consistent with the original focus of what we serve, how it's programmed, and making sure that we're doing it as efficient as possible.
So I guess to refine the question I asked earlier, we wouldn't need to wait to develop a splash park on this site for things like the interagency agreement between us, North Thurston, and the Y, or the build of the other pieces of the project. The splash park could come first.
Yeah, so we would need an agreement. The North Thurston Public Schools is the owner of the property, and they'll own all the buildings on the site too. So anything that is not theirs would need to have an agreement. So, yeah, so a spray park at their site, we would definitely need an agreement with the school district that would say that the city would pitch in this amount of capital and then agree to maintain and operate it.
No, that's what I was going to, the maintenance. Even on the future rec center, would they be in charge of the maintenance on that as well?
Yeah, so what they would do is they would have an agreement with the YMCA that says, we're leasing this space for this amount of money, or however they wanted to format it, and then whose responsibility was for what.
But with the future splash pads, it's much more straightforward with just the school district. We have that traditional relationship with the school district, and it's also something that can be, built early as we wait for the future rec center project to come to fruition and the partnerships to align.
So they wouldn't be sharing title with us in any capacity whatsoever? Okay.
Greg Keogh Park next phase. As you know, between 2002 and 2011, the city acquired these park properties that you see up here, combines to make a total of 537 acres. We went through a year-and-a-half master planning process of taking that balcony view of these properties and engaging with the public to see what they wanted on their property. And as you know, we are going to be beginning construction in 2025 and develop 139 acres of the total, and you can see that Phase 1A circled there in the middle. The next phase, which is not funded and which is on that PCIP list, is 1B, so finishing up the first phase. That would bring restrooms, utilities, frontage improvements for safety, landscaping with irrigation, and then additional trails to include a cross-country course, a playground zip line, and then potentially, if it could be squeezed in, the Lacey's first dog park, just depending on how the budget all would pan out. But the benefit and need, this is one of the only parks in North Lacey. We talked about the park desert north of I-5. Increasing access and amenities are essential to serve our community up north, and really, people would come, from all over for this park, obviously. And then trails and preservation and access to outdoor spaces is a top theme from the public.
Which one is 1B? Is it the one on the other side of Carpenter, or is this?
Nope, 1B is additional amenities to that core.
Oh, okay.
And so, would there not be any trails outside this in 1B? Like, would we not collect?
Right.
We're not connecting Pleasant Glade Park to
Nope.
that yet.
Not yet. That would be a future phase. Although they are right next to each other. So
Yeah.
you could,
But we don't have a
travel.
we don't have a
There's
form,
no- Right,
there's no formal trail though,
Correct.
connecting the two yet.
It wouldn't be until the next phase that a maintenance shed would be installed out at this location?
the what?
Maintenance shed?
Maintenance, parks maintenance, I think that's separate.
Oh, the shop, right, 1B does not require the shop. It would be once we get to phase 2.
The other side of the road.
Carpenter.
What's the timeline for Phase 1A? I know it starts this year, but when does it?
Yeah,
when's it
so
anticipated to
we're
wrap up?
hoping, so it's out to ad right now. They're due the 23rd of January. And, yeah, so, I mean, hopefully we'll be before council here next month, getting approval for construction. And then we'll start, hopefully in March, like just as soon as the weather and everything's appropriately lined up. And then, hopeful for an opening in fall, just depending on how construction goes.
And we've already got placeholder dollars for this, so it's
Yeah.
the other projects that were,
Yeah, the only reason I mentioned 1A is because B is the second part of that where we, get the restrooms and then some of the other things that the public really wants. So, Yep.
Is there any other questions on, maybe we can go back to slide 15, it shows the list. If there are any other questions on any other of the projects that were identified in the priority list?
In just the top 5?
But just, right now, because we're going to go on to maintenance and replacement projects, but I just want to just take a check and see if there's any more questions on this list before we get into the maintenance and
I
replacement.
mean,
We didn't talk about Meridian Park Sports Field yet.
So we did, just in that same slide with we did 1 and 5 together.
so I'm not sure if I'm ready to say this is going to be our top 5 and we're going to move on. But
Right.
is there any more questions
That's
about?
what I was asking for, is questions and more information.
The one thing, just, selecting the first spray park, I think the spray parks are probably a low-cost thing that is beneficial to the entire community, and I would look at the spray parks as a combined item instead of separating them and picking and choosing, which neighborhood, and if we're gonna ask all of Lacey to be, funding this, I think all of Lacey should see more of an immediate benefit, and say, oh, okay, I can actually see what the results of this are, so that's my one minor thing on here. I think that's
Well, I think you're getting at a good point, and I think let's get through this and then.
yeah, I
and
wasn't
then-
sure when to bring
Yeah,
that
I
up.
know,
I
it's
was
a
like,
tough-
I just want to
it's-
check on the items 6 through 15, if there are any specific questions on any of those that you want to touch on before we leave.
Well,
Just listening to the
Oh,
property.
there's-
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Did we get, I think we got, 53 comments about the need to resurface the Rainier Vista pickleball courts. Is that incorporated in number 7? And is the concern just that it's number 7 and not up in the top 5?
Okay,
Or are
so-
do they want more?
Yeah, great question, because we have been talking with the Pickleball Association about that. And so that was an emergent need that came up after this PCIP. Like I said before, this was a snapshot in time. We do have that now added to the PCIP, just not this list. So it doesn't refer to number 7. Number 7 is the new addition of 4 new courts. And then adding 2 outdoor table tennis tables and safety, and then adding safety netting between Rainier Vista, the field that is adjacent to the pickleball courts, the current pickleball
The
courts.
softball, baseball.
So and that project, we have an RCO grant we've applied for. So we're just waiting to see if we get funded at the $500,000 level for that project. And so
If we get the
that
grant money.
particular one on there,
It'll move even faster than
Yeah.
any of these projects.
right, correct, yeah.
Is there any other questions about any specific items on there?
Virgil Clarkson Senior Center Phase 3. Right, I know we talked about that. It went from 5,000 to 10,000. Now we're talking about going to 15. Is that, am I thinking of something else?
When you're saying 5, 10, and 15?
Well, yeah,
Just-
so what is phase 3 for
Oh, do you
the
want
senior
to,
center?
looks like Jenny's looking for the slide here. So
Okay.
we can pull it up, yeah.
I mean, I guess we can wait till the end, but it's not surprising that the idea of a splash park or a spray park is high on the community's list. Because during the summers, even though it's somewhat of a short time, there's really not a lot of places to go. But there's actually 2 really amazing places that not only Lacey, but, this, the whole region sort of goes to, and that is Long Lake and Hicks Lake. And so it's somewhat surprising that, considering we just purchased the additional property at Long Lake, that we actually have a partner in the county who's willing to go in on the property to help improve it, because they see some desire to have that there too. But then the fact that Wanchers Park isn't listed at all, I really think is, the only reason why it's not listed, because it's not something that it's very well known about. But the master plan for Wanchers Park is amazing, is absolutely amazing. And if it was built, forget about going to a spray park. Everyone would go to Wanchers Park and would go to Long Lake Park if we could have it built. And the one nice thing about that is at least the ongoing maintenance of the pools are very, very expensive to maintain. In this case, the lake maintains itself, hopefully with some help from the lake districts. But so in my mind, when I see spray parks, I'm thinking, okay, what can we have in our community for kids and people of all ages to go and be safe and cool off? And to me, it's the lakes, but we just don't have a great, we don't have enough facilities. And we know that in Long Lake Park, it is so packed. That's why people don't use it more, because we don't have the room. But with the addition of the park property, man, we could really do some cool stuff there. And then Wanchers Park that master plan's not even here, which is amazing to me, because I think probably out of all the lakes, the Hicks Lake is the best lake to swim in. It's the warmest, it's calm. And that Wanchers Park area is huge, but it hasn't been developed at all. And I think if we were trying to make a big, this is what you're getting for your dollars, and improving the two things that made Lacey a community 120 years ago was our lakes, period. That's why we're sitting right here today, having this conversation, is because we had resorts on the 3 lakes that touch Lacey. And so I think that's where, if we want to create some excitement, talking about what this actually looks like and Wanchers Park looks like, that can accommodate a lot more than a spray park, is, to me, very exciting. And I think something the public would be very interested if the information was out to them. So that's why when I'm thinking spray park, and you see in all these spray parks, I think we can sort of wrap that into is okay, what can we do for the summer months that we have to get people cool off and enjoy the outdoors. So that's just my 2 cents on that. But do you even have a slide for what Wanchers Park?
No, Wanchers, so where that one falls in the current comprehensive plan is just in that longer term. I think it just kind of speaks to the number of projects that we have, and, taking the public input, and then, staff and stakeholder input, and just trying to do our best, putting those into the top list, is very challenging, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And what's one thing nice about this process and this recommendation is looking at that sustainable funding source, that over time, you can hit to these projects. Everything on this list, plus more, as Jim mentioned, the other things are further out, have the opportunity, if we're able to create that sustainable, dependable funding source, to be able to program that. And then also, as you move forward in the initial, after the initial several years, you can recalibrate what are the community priorities and continue to pivot and build and expand these park facilities. The other thing too is cost and operation. You have your capital costs, some have lower capital costs than others, so there's a timing about, whether reserving dollars or figuring out other funding strategies, using this as a source for bonding or other types of activities to be able to do the bigger projects versus the little project, and finding that balance between them. So this gives a lot of flexibility for these conversations ongoing for the council and the community.
And we're looking for the senior center.
That's correct. Phase 3.
Okay.
We got some slides here to show for the senior center, real quick. Jenny's just pulling those open and hiding them and pulling them open.
And we were talking about overall numbers. It looked like it was 7.8 plus 1.4 plus roughly 10 million. If we added it all up between the three, sometimes I jump right in the midstream. People are like, where are you at?
What are you talking about?
Tell us a
So
little
we're
more
talking about
about
general
that.
dollars, or general fund dollars, and what all these different locations are costing. And the main general fund dollars that we were using was like 7.8 million, right? To fund
Yeah, currently, the current
currently,
funding, yeah.
and that was just for,
That's our current Parks, Culture, and Recreational Program.
which didn't
cost.
include the senior center.
No,
Or
no,
did it?
it doesn't, because that's in the facilities column, that was the far right column,
In
And
the
it also
buildings.
didn't include
the rack.
the rack.
Those are three different
Right.
pots.
Okay, and so when you add those three pots of money together, which I'm always trying to do, it came out to about 10.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
10.1.
That's
Yep,
correct.
And you're
I see
talking,
where you're at.
that's less than a
Yeah.
year and a half of this MPD funding,
Right. So that's,
literally.
that is our delta, is that 10 that we ideally would like to make happen if at all possible, to get those three items off of general fund dollars. And
Well, reduce
Reduce,
the
yeah.
ability and build flexibility to continue to expand, because we would be limited in our expansion of parks facilities and doing some of these improvements that the community's identified, because we don't have the, increased funding sources or the predictable funding sources for the ongoing operation and maintenance that you add on to the pot as you develop more facilities.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so for MPD, we're talking new funding for parks.
New,
Yes.
which, and part of the reason why we want new funding for it is so that we can take it off of general fund funding? Or are we just saying, hey, let's add?
So one of the things is we have the current funding we currently have in the model in place, and that's not necessarily going to be replaced. We're going to continue that commitment we currently have. It's just the additional value of funding that can build and expand parks to build out, like Cuyo Park,
Got it.
Cuyo Park.
Which is the $7 million,
We're
right?
not, we're not gonna
So you're looking at
supplant.
it like a 3% increase of the budget to parks.
Yeah.
That's what this would be, is 3% increase
All right.
to a $200 million budget. It'd be a 3% increase. Right? 7 million,
More in that ballpark?
666 line across the top.
Troy says yes, he's nodding.
I just want to make a point before, just my main concern overall is with the top five is, and if I'm way off, someone please correct me on this, but it just seems like it's a lot that's geared towards the newer built, newer parts of Lacey. And I want to make sure that we're not just directing funds just towards those places, that it's spread across the city, that everyone's getting a benefit. And that's probably my biggest worry. I think everything on here is great, the pools, all these things are great, but I think, in order to get the public support behind this, that everybody is gonna have to see, like Long Lake, those topics of these other areas that we've kind of neglected, and maybe it's just because people don't think about it anymore. They think about all this new stuff we have. So as we go forward, that's my main concern, is that everybody's benefiting from this. They don't have to cross the freeway or go way out of their way. in order
I
to
think the
access.
equity issue is a really important issue to bring up. And I think that's what we've learned. If you go back 24 years ago, when the last time we went out for a big bond measure, we did it and it failed originally. And then we had came back and realized, oh geez, if everyone's gonna pay for it, everyone wants a little bit of something. And so that's how we spread parks around, and then it passed. I think that's what we're hopefully gonna try to do here as well, is sort of have, something in the north, something central, and something in the south. And it needs to be something a little bit for everyone as well.
I think the important thing is the message is, for a 3% increase in our park funding, we can achieve all these literally in 10 years.
Well, yeah.
We can put $60 million towards this stuff and have it be a reality, and not just something we're talking about, you know what I mean?
But, yeah.
Something you can actually touch and see and feel and use and benefit from.
We have the slide of the version as Clarkson Senior Center.
Oh.
Wanna-
Yeah,
This one.
just expansion of the facility and parking is needed for sure. It's packed, and we've just got more and more senior demographic every day. So due to overcrowding, there's a need for expansion. The parking lot's often full. And then we've got, if you want to flip through these ones, just some photos of the senior center and the parking. There's some of the more crowded days. Here's the concept plan. And so the senior center was built, there, it was added onto, and then in this concept, there's a third phase, which is what the current need is.
You're not stretching over towards the community center.
The third phase goes the other way,
The
towards,
direction down this slide, so
Yeah.
there.
To the east.
towards the Lake County.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's
just kind
adding
of a-
on the left there then.
Well, yeah, closer
Yeah,
to
it's
log
confusing.
cabin.
The floor plan is flipped from the elevation.
Okay,
The
yeah,
Pacific would be to
You're right,
the
yeah.
top of it, yeah,
okay, yeah, we're looking at top it down, so it's going to the,
on the lake to
Yeah.
the south.
okay.
So, yeah.
And it's an additional square footage wise?
Say it again?
How much more additional square foot are we looking at?
I don't have that right off the top of my head, but.
Yeah, to Councilmember Dunning's point, the first 5 on the list are all, they're all North Lacey, nothing south of Carpenter, the Cuyo thing.
And I
But
re-
fortunately, we haven't voted on any of this or
No, yeah.
made any
this is-
decisions yet, so.
I don't want to overcomplicate things, and I know it affects the budget, but I really like your idea of treating the splash park development as one project instead of 4. Because that, I mean, it's sort of designed in the proposal to be the different parts of Lacey.
Could reduce costs a little bit too, in the long run.
Maybe, do all the purchasing of all the components at once instead of 4 separate projects.
What's that park on Yelm Highway, between the QFC and the condos?
Bush Park.
Bush.
So, and just kind of speak to the point, and this is halfway through the prior list, because the other half is some of the replacement and M&O projects. And of course, in the southern and central area of Lacey, the College Street corridor, there's some of the older areas, older parks. And so there's projects identified in here that would be improving or enhancing those as well. So when we get to that, you'll see some of that as another piece of the overall recommendation on projects.
Yeah, and something just real quick on the spray parks to highlight that 4 spray parks is just a concept of like different quadrants of the city, and to your point, spreading it out. To put in a spray park, there would need to be adequate space to do so, and parking too, so that people could have a place to park when they come and use it. So kind of those, the way they are on the list, number 2 says Southwest Lacey, so the notion there would be potentially Rainier Vista Park. And then northeast could be Meridian Park. And then number 4, there isn't really a good place that's been identified. So that was just the concept. So, you know, whether the final number ends up being 3 or 4, you know, could be discussed. So just something to point out there. All right, so we will move on to the replacement M&O projects. And so with the work group, their recommendation was with 40% geared towards maintenance, that could take care of these needed replacement projects on this list, plus the M&O that would be needed for the completion of capital projects. For example, Greg Cuyo Park, you know, you build it, you have to have the M&O, obviously. So we're just gonna highlight the top 5, and Jenny's getting there. To take a little bit of a deeper dive, and then, of course, we can answer questions about anything else that's on the list as well. Yep, so this is the order that the group had ranked them in. Go ahead. We'll move right into Huntermore Park. So the climbing structure needs to be replaced. It's 19 years old and it's starting to show a lot of damage. Each feature, so the benefit and need, each feature is a single piece. So once there's significant damage, we would just need to remove it, resulting in fewer amenities at this point. And then just pointing out the outdoor facilities was a top theme with playgrounds as a priority. As council knows, this one is a piece of a bigger Lacey Midtown project with the Community and Economic Development Department. But the park's specific focus is replacement of aging infrastructure. And the next on the list is Homan Park. The project is to replace the asphalt in the picnic area. There's 2 large Douglas fir trees in the picnic area that have grown too large for the enclosure. In addition, there's some asphalt buckling that's a tripping hazard. Obviously, that's listed under the benefit or the need. Basically, this project needs to happen. It can be done soon as a proactive measure to save those trees. If the trees die, the project will still be necessary because we'll need to excavate and remove the stumps out. We've got another picture, just kind of a closer view of that skirting there and the asphalt damages, or the girdling, I guess I should say. Moving on to Wonderwood Park, this project would resurface the Stikes to Brentwood Trail that has experienced significant wear and tear. The need is that the asphalt is buckling. You can see it in the photo. The trails are highly used, and just to note, the trails and outdoor facilities were top themes from the public. Got another picture. You can kind of see the wear. And then next on the list is the RAC synthetic turf replacement. The turf is replaced every 9 to 10 years. Depending on the amount of use, our fields get a lot of use, and so it's sooner than later. Softball fields 1 and 2 were the first ones that were replaced since the original turf, and now they're gonna be up again soon for replacement. The benefit is that as a premier facility, both for the local community and people coming in from out of town, high-quality fields and facilities definitely attract that use in those tournaments.
And we have those dollars earmarked, right? If I remember correctly. in the
Fields 1
LTAC
and
budget.
2, we do have in reserves, right?
Yeah.
Troy? Okay, and then the RAC baseball playground replacement. So there's 3 playground areas at the RAC, but the baseball complex is out of warranty, 15 years old, becoming more and more challenging to maintain. So because of the high use of the sports complex visitors and regular park visitors, the RAC playgrounds are the heaviest used playgrounds in our system. And so heavy use is degrading the toys at a more rapid rate. And, you know, they may not be the oldest, but they do need the repairs because of the amount of use. So that was the 5th one on the list. And were there questions?
So-
Rick, do you want to? Oh.
Since I don't see it on the list and it's been brought up, the maintenance operation or replacement of the tennis courts, where's
Oh, yeah,
that?
so it's on our current PCIP, and so essentially, we're just now getting to the point in our budget cycle to where staff will be looking at what requests we want to put in for 2026 budget. So
Okay,
that's
so
that's one of the things that'll be considered when we just have to look at what else. I mean, most of our budget requests are like dire need type of things. So we'll have to just look at what other needs are on there.
And going back to that slide at the very beginning, we talked about the current funding and there was reserves. And really the point of that is we're trying to identify reserves from year to year to be able to, you know, repair or replace or fix those items that are probably more pressing in priority. But if we had a funding structure that we could, again, dedicate, we can have a little bit more responsiveness to ongoing maintenance and repairs so that we're not seeing deferral as much as we have been in the past. Because again, overall funding structure, we're at that point where we don't have a lot of excess funds to be able to pitch into those repairs from year to year. And so that would help out in terms of the comments tonight about, like, say, Rainier, Vista Park, and the tennis fields.
So you're saying that is gonna happen regardless of any of this, it's just where it's at in the funding cycle?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, we've known.
And
that-
grants and
We've known for a
opportunities.
long,
Yeah.
we've known it's a need. We just have to look at what we can do as far as repairs first. And like I said, just compare it to what else is the highest need, so.
Okay.
Any other questions on the maintenance and replacement projects? Okay. So that's through the current recommendation from the work group on project priorities. So I want to take a pause here and just kind of talk about a little bit more, and we can go on the next slide. And really, it's hard to say, okay, these projects are first or priorities, and this is a busy slide, but we really want to kind of put them side by side to look at those different projects and then also have the costs associated with including the maintenance and operation that's been projected. Just to kind of get a sense from the council that, we already heard, we want to make sure there's equitable distribution of projects throughout the Lacey community. We also heard that we want to have things that can be, some immediate successes and see a difference, sooner rather than later. And then a structure that funds some of those larger, big pieces. But are there anything else that council would like to offer on this list in terms of priorities? And also, development around the lakes as well is another piece. So is there anything else that the council would like to talk about in terms of these type of projects and how they're listed in terms of priority or sequence?
Will rack phase 3 cover any of these maintenance, or would this be completely separate from?
Currently, RAC Phase 3 is on a program and plan to be utilizing the Public Facility District dollars that comes in on it. But again, as you look back to that earlier side of the current funding model, the first phase of the RAC is currently on operation dollars, is still having $400,000 of PFD reserves that would also have to be continued forward into this extension to accommodate. So there is a piece there that we need to kind of look at and address, but in essence, the RAC Phase 3 would be under the PFD dollars.
I just more so meant, will any of the rack phase 3 potentially be some of these maintenance fixes or?
It could long-term. It could long-term, because one of the challenges with the PFD is that there's a sunset. That sunset just got kicked off another 15 years. And if that doesn't get extended again, we're going to have to look at how do we continue the operation and maintenance of the RAC facilities.
If I was to prioritize, I would say court surfaces and playground equipment would be my two priorities.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to sit here at this second and say, okay, what is our, we're going to stick to these priorities 1 through 5, because so many things can sort of change. I think what we need to do is have a commitment to the types of things that we want to do if we receive funding, and it needs to be, in my mind, it needs to be and there we need to continue to think about the equity issue, and we're going to do improvements in these areas, and sort of come at that point, from that direction. I think the whole pool and indoor playground and that potential partnership, God, that's like, in my mind right now, that's still sort of like out there is a possibility that it could happen, but there's so much that needs to fall in place for that to sort of come to fruition. What I'm hearing from the public, and I completely agree, and we knew about this last time, is we need more indoor recreational space. We have no indoor recreational space, and really in Thurston County, it's hard to get an indoor basketball court. That's, you have to work with the schools, and they're just not set up. I mean, and that is the number one thing I hear is we know what our weather's like, and so the majority of the year, we have to think about indoor facilities. And so I think there should be a commitment that we are going to do some sort of indoor facility. What that specifically looks like, it could be this partnership with North Thurston Public School. I think that would be our preference. But I think we need to make a commitment, like we will be doing indoor, and that's sort of the commitments we're going to be making is we're going to do outdoor recreation for summertime, for splash parks, blah, 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 lakes, so on and so forth. We're going to have it indoor. But to actually say 1, 2, 3, 4 at this point is really hard. But
So I think I agree in terms of priorities, but I disagree with the tactic that you're proposing. I think we need to be able to describe a specific project or a couple of specific projects that we will be giving to people
Yeah.
if we want them to vote for something. Because if we just say,
You're right.
we're
Well,
going to
yeah.
provide something,
We're gonna slate, here we
people are
go.
going to
Sure.
not trust that. And I think if we could say, this is the site, and this is what it's going to look like, here's an artist rendering, this is what you're paying for, I think we will have a better time explaining that to voters. You know, we know indoor recreation and splash parks are high priorities, but if we can create a couple of really visible, specific projects, I think we can figure the rest out later, but we need a couple of things to campaign on.
Yeah, here's a,
And I think-
you can expect.
If I can add in real quick too, it can evolve and get more specific as we move forward. Right now, and Jen talked about this, right now, we're always talking about right into the project specific, but really it's the themes that we're hearing from the community and how do we fit our projects to those themes to be able to identify, and that can, get honed in as we move forward in this process. There's also some steps in later on, if we go forward with this process of, doing some more communication work, getting some more feedback, depending on the timing we have to do the prep. But there is that opportunity to really fine tune what are those projects that are valuable that are in addition to the spray parks and the other type of amenities we've talked about.
Well, I think one of the things that sunk the 2018 measure is there were some kind of nebulous language in there, and then there was this misinformation that got out into the community about building stadiums and, all kinds of things that people, I think, were saying, no, that's too much. And I agree with Robin, we need to have some very specific proposals, and I think they need to represent different geographic parts of the city, so that in this first phase of it, if you will, each, if we have 3 parts of the city defined, each one gets a project. And I'm not going to haggle too much over which project goes where. I mean, I think from the list it can make sense, but I think we've got to identify early on, what we're talking about so that we can kind of control,
Look at the narrative,
what's
yeah.
going out into the community and what we're really talking about, rather than having the grapevine run amok about these things.
First of all, it only failed by, 400 or 700 votes.
Yeah,
It
it
was
wasn't
next
a
to
lot,
nothing.
yeah.
I think we need to be strategic. I do think we need to be specific on projects that pretty much are a promise. If this happens in so many years, we're gonna have this, period. But we need to focus on what's, like what got us elected. Seniors and children's parents. Same thing with this. If this is gonna pass, we need to say, hey, seniors, this senior center will, get expanded. This, spray parks will happen, some indoor stuff for our kids during the winter, that, and be strategic. But, this is not, shouldn't be a heavy lift. It only failed by a couple hundred votes, period.
Well, I agree. The only thing that I guess me being this, I'm worried about saying we are going to for sure be able to make the indoor pool, part. If you pass this, we're going to do it. That's what I'm saying. I feel like, okay.
There's some things outside our control.
There's
in
some
that
things
process.
outside of our control. I would love to be able to say that. I just don't feel comfortable, but I can say like, this is the project that we're trying to do, like this, but it's hard to make that promise that's gonna happen because there's things outside of our
Well, you
control.
can certainly say none of this will happen anytime
Sure,
soon if it
yeah.
doesn't pass.
That's very true. And so, that's why it's so hard. I think, again, I agree, we need to pick, needs to be something in all the quadrants of Lacey, real early on, something very identifiable that they know that is coming. And then here are the things that are our priorities and that we're gonna be focused on, but.
I was just gonna say, and I don't wanna pass something by a couple hundred votes either. Like, I don't want half the community to not want something. In order to do that, I think we have to have the equity. I love the pool idea, a lot of that because, well, if we have an actual agreement, because then we also have the school board, and we need as many partners as possible, just like with the senior center. We're gonna need as many possible partners with this in many different areas in order, in a really different probably time right now, a weird time for everyone financially in order to get the overwhelming support that I would rather have than just sneaking it by.
I agree, like, with the concerns about just, we don't have full control over the Child and Family Center. Like, I really want that to happen personally. It's a huge value of mine to add more childcare options in the community. But because we don't have full control over it, I am a little nervous about having it be sort of like the headline for this parks funding effort.
Me too.
But I was going to ask, we're looking at these priorities, but a foundational question for me, are they prioritized in terms of things we would do first, time-wise? Or are they just prioritized in that they are the things that are most important to us? Because that's kind of different.
Good question.
Yeah, so the work group was asked to prioritize, just with their opinion as different community members and stakeholders in order of how the projects could go. I mean, that's what they were tasked with. As we talked about, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. Some of them could very well be knocked off the list, depending on funding that's coming in or not coming in. So it's not an exact science, I'll say. Time-wise, I mean, our capacity to pull off a project is different. So what they did was those top 5 projects with the funding that could come in the first 5 years, if funded just under $6 million annually, it's revenue-based, not timeline-based.
That's really helpful. So the amount of money that we would have in the first 5 years, what could we fit into that amount of money?
Yes,
And I think,
that's right.
and they also talked about too, not only the funding mechanism, but also capacity of pushing projects out through our construction design program too. So there's another factor there of what we can actually do from year to year in terms of workload.
So I look at this list, like I look at our budget, as soon as we pass it, it's changing. The next minute, the next day, the next week, whatever. But I think messaging when we go out to the public is, lack of better example, like Geico, 15 minutes, save 15%. We should do something with that. With a 3% increase, we can have this. This is reality, and not a maybe. And whatever that list is, it's going to change and form and be its own creature. But if we keep it simple, for as little 3%, you can have your dream park system for the city.
We do have, some renderings, like Cuyo, and then we have some vacant spaces with, cool potential design work, right, that could lead out on this, as opposed to, saying, hey, here's this thing that we're doing with this other entity that may or may not come to the fruition that we hope it's going to come to. So one of the reasons why I said, court surfaces and playground equipment is because it lines up with our seniors and it also lines up with our youth. So those would also be 2 good avenues to travel, in addition to, hey, we've got, this Cuyo master plan, it's awesome, here's a rendering of it, and here's some spaces that we are looking to develop as well.
I totally on board with, we need renderings to go along. That's almost like we have to be careful here, because there's a campaign side of this, and then there's a priorities for funding, and we can't mix those two. Those are 2 separate deals. When we talk about, it's a separate group. It's not this group that's going to talk about, the ballot measure and how that happens. That's going to be a separate group. So let's be cognizant of that.
That little segue, I just like to wrap up on hearing is looking at this list and looking at, again, the equity, the things that can be quick realizations, things that can access the themes of water, and then also those things that are in our control, and then what are opportunities, maybe those things are not in our control that may not be right away, but this gives the opportunity for that.
Well, and
Or is it an opportunity?
I mean, I would really want to see the updated Launchers Park design. I mean, I remember when that was before us. Now it's been years ago. But I remember looking at that and going, wow, would that be a feature that our entire community would be proud of and want to go to, where you could have a picnic, you could launch there's all the things that people love about Lacey and our lakes. I mean, Launchers Park was amazing. And then the Long Lake expansion too, I think we do have some opportunities to partner with the county. And whenever I think of, some of these big things, is like, is there a partnership that could go along with it too? And on Long Lake, I think there is a partnership there. So I kind of want to see what those things look like as well, but we could.
And again, we can, like I
Yeah.
said, hone this in as we go, if we go forward and when we go forward. Maybe it's time to kind of put a pin in this
Yes,
conversation now
I
and
agree.
move into the structure of a metropolitan park district and what that would look like and how that would be formed and what based on the work group's recommendation, what would be that levy ask?
Thanks, Rick. I'll, talk about an MPD. And so to Rick's point, the framework within which the work group discussed an MPD was a local model of an MPD, which follows the exact city boundary. But an MPD may be created for the management, control, improvement, maintenance, and acquisition of parks, parkways, boulevards, and recreation facilities. It's authorized by the RCW you see on your screen there, 3561210. The RCW states the maximum assessed value levy rate is 75 cents per thousand valuation. Like I said, the work group had looked at that the governance could be simplified with a city boundary. It would pass with a simple majority vote. It could be used for both capital and M&O. It's further up the list of junior taxing districts, and there is no sunset.
While we're kind of on that subject of within city boundaries or expanding beyond, I've talked with 2 county commissioners, and both of them are very concerned about critically underfunded county parks and have expressed some interest in creating a metropolitan park district of their own for the county. And so I feel like that's a conversation. I mean, we need to know what each other is thinking and doing, and so.
And I guess the reason why we bring this up is
Yeah.
because, as is listed here, the governance can be simplified by doing the city boundaries, but I was, having a conversation just last week, believe it or not, with the city manager and the deputy mayor, and it doesn't have to be our city boundaries. It can be our city boundaries in our urban growth area. And the other thing that you have to think about is, it's not necessarily about the levy rate, it's about how much do you want to raise, and that sets the levy rate. And so that dollar amount fluctuates based on the point in time. And this is where other jurisdictions have gotten in trouble. They've set a levy rate they set based on when the vote passed, and then their assessed value grows and it bumps up to that. And so when they think, going to 40, you're raising it, it's going to go to a different dollar that it's going to grow with that. That's not how it happens. The levy rate sets, you need to figure out how much you want to raise, and then that's what you set the levy rate initially on that. And then, that's why this thing is somewhat difficult. But if you look at the opportunity and the possibility of the assessed value within the city of Lacey and an urban growth area, that levy rate would drop dramatically if going out to begin with if we kept it at the 5.8 million. Because there's considerably more assessed value. And so it wouldn't have a levy rate of 47 cents. It would have a levy rate considerably lower than that. We don't know what that number is yet because we have to get what that assessed value is. But that would cause, we would have to have an agreement with the county. They would have to agree to put on the ballot as well to set the boundary. There's some other things that would need to happen. And I guess the decision is, when and how do you make this decision? Especially if the county is wanting to go out and do their own Metropolitan Parks District, are they include our urban growth areas in that? And, because that would cause an issue.
Well, that is a, hold on. When you look at the structure of the Metropolitan Parks District, one of the things that, going back in 2018, council decisions at the time was looking at this as, one is how do you can control of your own boundary, because basically the council becomes the Metropolitan Parks District Board. If you have a shared jurisdictional boundary within the Metropolitan Parks District, then you have either two options. One is having the Metropolitan Parks District Commissioners, which would be 5, elected directly or appointed. And that means you'd have to figure out, okay, representation between the two partners, or if there's more than 2 partners. So that's a piece of that as well. It also, you have to start working on developing interlocal agreements on what is the structure, what is the funding distribution, how do you, because the Metropolitan Parks District, remember, is a special use district. It's its own entity. And so then it has its own assets. And so how do you create the internal agreements for leasing and paying for staff and equipment that's between the 2 different jurisdictions? So it creates a higher level of complication, and also it's timing, right? We've been working on the premise from the first time we started talking about the Metropolitan Parks District. The work group has been looking at this as a city, focused park boundary. And so everything we've looked at is what is for the Lacey community, even though we know that there are many more uses of our parks that go beyond the city of Lacey limits. And that's one of the benefits of looking at a broader jurisdiction, is you capture more people that are users of the system. But you also have, again, the complications of structure and governance and how that works. So there's some value to that conversation, but also there's some challenges and cons, and part of it too is timing at this point, because you'd have to sit down and introduce the idea with the county and go through those conversations. And if they're looking at their own Metropolitan Parks District for their parks out in the rural area, because I don't think they have any parks inside our growth area.
Correct.
You could be looking at a county-wide parks district, which the city of Lacey is a part of, or you have the Lacey Metropolitan Parks District that includes the growth area, but then you have this other boundary that's outside, and that creates another complication of equity between county residents. So there's a lot of good conversation we have to go through, and if we're looking at doing something this year, I don't think we'd be able to make it, because there's a lot of conversations, and it's also got to be, is it a priority of the county to work on it this year with everything they have going on? So there's some challenges there.
I didn't say there wasn't going to be challenges, but I think it's like, I think it's worth at least having a conversation about what would an interlocal agreement look like. And for me, it really depends on what would that actually do to the rate, because talk about an equity issue. Everyone within our urban growth area, looking on the map there, they all use Lacey Parks, and yet they're not paying for Lacey Parks. And so we're looking to, civically, if you look where the rack is at, or the lakes are at, or Greg Pulia Park is at, I mean.
Another thing too to consider as well is if you're going to span that boundary, is what do we need to do for, focus engagement and perspective out there? What do they see as value to them? We talked about equity. There's only one Lacey facility that's partially developed in McAllister, but there's not a lot of minis in the urban growth area. So there's also that question that you'd have to do some testing, and I believe probably some survey work to kind of get a sense of what is the sentiment in that area, because to date, we focused on some broader, there's people that commented on our engagement processes that are not just city residents, of course, but also the work group was focused more on the Lacey boundary and the community needs too. So I just want to.
And just a couple things I'll point out too, is that there is, there's Tumwater has a Metropolitan Park District that follows the city boundary, and Olympia has one that follows the city boundary. And people use, everybody in Thurston County uses everybody's parks.
Yeah.
And then, I had another point.
Well,
I'll come back
I know
to it.
Scott had his hand up. I just want to make sure.
Oh, just, while he's putting his microphone on, the other one is that, the concept, sorry, Scott, the concept with the city boundary with a local model is that as you annex, then those folks would come into that MPD funding mechanism.
And you keep control too.
So just a little history, there's some similarities between the TBD and the MPD. Probably about 14 years ago, the chair of the county commissioners came over and asked the city council to participate in a regional transportation benefit district with Thurston County. Our roads were in great shape. Theirs weren't in as good a shape as ours. As Rick said, it would require a joint board. So the council at that time didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about it. They just didn't see any point in putting our money into a common pot and then having to go ask a joint board to get our money back. So that was their decision back then. And then also, Thurston County formed a transportation benefit district a few years before us, but they never pursued a funding mechanism. They didn't councilmatically approve increased vehicle fees, which is an option, and they didn't go to voters for a sales tax increase. So anyway, just
Well,
thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, that was a three-person commission, that was a totally different circumstance. It's tough for me to make a decision if it's even worth it unless I really understand what it would do to our initial levy rate and what does it mean. I mean, we have such a unique urban growth area where, just look at it, like where and where our parks are at and where we're talking about doing improvements affects everyone really along those lines. I just feel like it was at least worth looking at some initial numbers and then maybe it's not worth it, but maybe it's worth a conversation. I just don't want to necessarily just come and put it to bed because of a couple unknowns. I mean, it's at least worth having a conversation about.
Again, that it is, I think, again, it's worth, this is the time to have the conversation. And if we can, see if we can pull together some information about what that value is in UGA and what that would mean. And it just, be aware too, even with that value, that could be a timing issue in terms of having the conversation if we go there. But if we can maybe go on to the next slides and start talking about the committee's work group's recommendation on the levy amount, and we can kind of talk about how that levy functions and what we could get out of it and potential growth. As Jen did say, either you can have the whole growth area as part of it or have it as a city, and as a city annex, those areas become part of not only the city but also the metropolitan district, and then it grows from year to year as you annex over time in the annexation strategy.
Would it be possible to perhaps convene a workshop meeting with the commissioners sometime within the next 6 weeks or so?
Well, we can think about that. Let's work through this, and then we can also talk about timing, because I think timing is a very important factor, because I think there's a lot of concern about when we go out, how we were successful. And just as a little plug, looking at ballot measures related to MPD formation or tax measures, even if we could put everything together perfectly, it still may not be successful. So we got to make sure we're sensitive to that as well.
Right. Okay.
So this slide shows the recommendation of the work group there as compared to some different levy rates. You can see the one highlighted in red is the one that they recommended, that 45 cents per thousand.
And what evaluation was that based on? Again, 'cause that's a snapshot
So $500,000.
in history, right?
$500,000.
Because the levy rate doesn't actually set until you have the up-to-date assessed value of whatever the boundary may be.
Yeah, you're correct. We have a slide to follow this, so we'll get to that exact point.
Yep. And then this next one is, I've already stated it, but it shows with the different levy rates, what that annual amount to the average homeowner would be. So you can see the $225 per year if the 45 cents per thousand assessed value is used.
And just as a point of clarity, just make sure everybody understands, the 75 cents on the far right is the maximum.
Yep.
Maximum statutory,
Yep.
a certain, point of whatever your assessed value is.
I kind of also wanted to point out that the number 500K, right? We're using it as the average home value, right? But a retail value and an assessed value are two different values. That is the average retail value of a home in Lacey. But if that's the retail value, the assessed value is going to be at least 12% less than that.
Yeah.
Less.
Do we have an idea
You
what
say
the?
12% less?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
'Cause the way-
we have a pretty good, that's another question that the assessor can tell us what the average assessed value home in Lacey is, right? They have that information.
Well, by law, it's supposed to follow market, but
Sure.
I believe state law only requires that properties be looked at in detail every 4 years. So in theory, 1/4 of the properties in Lacey are at market value and the other 3/4 are in this continuous loop. But it's
but-
probably safest in terms of our conversations and communications with the public to use, the worst case scenario, the highest valuation that you might see out there as an average homeowner.
So the worst case would be just under $19, but it could be closer to $15 a month.
Correct.
Sure, sure.
If we started off 45 from day one, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Price of going to move.
Troy's going to take it from here at this point.
Okay, I have one slide tonight. I was told to keep it short, so I will, or I'll try.
A lot of data into one slide, I see.
There is a lot of data here. Thank you for recognizing that. I actually have 5 points that I'm trying to illustrate with this one slide. One is
Good slide.
there's a distinct difference between the levy rate and the levy amount, as the mayor pointed out. I also want to show the potential impacts of the 1% increase that would be allowed. That would be the same revenue limit that the city is under. The Metropolitan Park Board would also be bound by that 1% limit. Also want to illustrate what potential new construction impacts may have in the long term. Levy rate projections for a long period, 10 years in this case, and as well as what the potential levy might look like in terms of receipts on an annual basis. So to kind of navigate the slide itself, we have 2 different graphs built into one. So the column graph uses the left-hand axis. That is the total amount of levy that would be receipted, or that's the projection. The line graph is the projected rate per thousand, and that uses the right axis as the gauge. So to give you an idea what the assumptions are, we're starting with 45 cents in year 1. That is the Parks Work Group recommendation. This assumes a 3% growth rate to assess valuation throughout the 10-year period. It assumes $75 million in new construction each year throughout this period, and it assumes that the future board would actually authorize the 1% increase per year. So the key points here are, and to get to the mayor's point about the actual calculation, the first year I'm using the 2025 assessed valuation. I know for a fact the 2026 valuation will not equal the 2025, so I'm here to admit right now, I'm already wrong, but we got to use something for our basis. So we are using about $13.3 billion of assessed valuation. Again, that is the 2025 certified amount.
Nice.
I think an important distinction is the levy rate versus the levy amount. And especially when we talk about going to the voters. So the ballot issue, if the council chooses to move forward, will have a levy rate amount that the voters will be authorizing. And in this scenario, it's 45 cents. That will be year 1's levy. It'll be 45 cents multiplied by the 2026 assessed valuation divided by 1,000, and that will give us our actual amount collected. So depending on what happens with valuation, but, we're taking just a snapshot in time for planning purposes of this 5.9.
Can we do it the other way? Can we say we want to raise 5.8 million in the first year? And then whatever that ends up being gives you your levy rate? Or do you have to?
Are you
Well,
talking about
the unknown
or
is
on
the
ballot?
assessed
Yeah,
valuation.
right,
So,
right. Because that's what we're really interested in is like, we have all these projects, there's a dollar amount to do the projects, what is it gonna take? And trying to work backward, that's what gives us whatever we need the rate to be.
Well, but the number that we have for the value of the projects is also this year's dollars,
Yeah.
right? And so the cost of the projects is probably also going to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't build in a way to like have that natural increase, we're going to have less money than we need to build all the stuff.
Yeah. But the one thing, again, you don't have on here is annexation.
Right.
Does that go straight to new construction?
It's treated exactly the same as new construction.
Okay, so you're not accounting that we're gonna have any annexations and,
No, that will be added on top, so.
okay, which could dramatically lower that rate.
We can lower the rate and increase the amount collected.
According to this, it shows the levy rate decreasing by 0.01% every year. Pretty
Right.
much, right?
Because there's a built-in 3%
So it's really,
valuation
you know, it
increase.
starts at 45, you know,
Ends up at
and 10 years later, it's almost 35.
But the levy you're collecting is slowly growing with the 1% and new construction valuation.
It's the
Just not
same thing
growing
that's
as
happened,
fast.
the same dynamic happened with the city's general levy. As it's an inverse relationship, so as
Yeah.
valuation goes up, the rate goes down, and that's
Same
just the
thing,
same.
same thing
same
here, but
illustration.
that's what I'm saying. Are you sure when you annex, don't, you're just adding assessed value, so it just drops the rate. You're not collecting more money.
Well, the board would have a choice, the same as the city. The city has chosen to accept that new construction and it be taxed at the current levy. You could choose to lower the entire levy for the city on new construction, but that would dramatically change the amount of increase you see from year to year in property tax. So the addition of annexation or new construction, that is exempt from the 1% limit. It's one of the things that's been, very helpful for our budgets is because we've had a lot of development and strong growth to new construction. So that has allowed us to grow beyond 1%. But yes, the board or the council always has the choice of taking less than the statutory max.
So my question with the financing, because, $6 million today is a lot less than $6 million 10 years from now. So it deflates over time. Are you required to spend all of your dollars as you're getting them in, or can you put them in reserves in order to make sure you're keeping up with those? That's where I was, just
No,
clarification there.
The board will adopt the budget every year like the city. It could choose to put money into reserves. In fact, this is a fund that we would probably want to build in a little bit of reserves for cash flow purposes, future planning, that type of thing, but will be at the discretion of the board. So the ballot issue will ask the voters to approve a levy rate. Again, the county will determine the amount that will generate once assessed valuation is determined. Unfortunately, we won't know the 2026 valuation until about December of 2025. So we are in a position that we have to make our best guess. We need to be cautious and aware, we always are, in terms of, what we're able to promise and what we can deliver. So certainly a disclaimer there. After year one, that rate really isn't a consideration going forward. It is a limiting factor, but the board will determine the levy going forward, but it will determine the levy amount, not the rate. Very similar to what the city does, that takes the lawful limit plus add-ons, which is annexation, new construction, 1%, and that becomes the levy. And then sometime after assessed valuation is certified by the county assessor, and the rate is determined usually in January the following year, and that's when the rate will be determined. So the board will determine the levy amount and not the rate going forward. I will say that the voter-approved levy rate of 45 cents, that will remain the ceiling going forward. That will be the highest lawful levy rate that will be allowed. So every year, the county, when it calculates that and the amount of the levy, if the rate ever exceeds 45 cents, the rate will go down to 45, and it will be 45 cents times whatever assessed valuation is. So that's all to say that this could come down in terms of the annual assessment, depending on what's happening out there. There's a lot of different limiting factors to property tax calculations, but it's at the higher, if the housing market or real estate goes down, that's going to cause the rate to go up, and that creates more possibilities that will run up against that limit. There's other jurisdictions. There's a whole set of layers of checkpoints in terms of what that levy may be. But again, just it's more of a cautionary comment than anything.
So I know on the property tax side, we can raise it 1% every year. I wasn't aware that you could do that on the Metropolitan Parks District side.
It's basically all taxing jurisdictions except for the state fall under that 1%.
Okay.
It's a state.
I didn't,
right?
yeah. I know it's a junior taxing district all on its own, but I didn't realize.
Like a fire district, the fire district fee, they have, it's a property tax, it's a junior, it's a special district, and they have that ability.
They can raise it 1%.
Yeah.
TBD as well?
Nope,
No,
that's the sales tax.
If they change the 1% rule, would then that also apply to this?
It would, well,
It
depending.
could possibly.
That's why I was just,
It's in a broad section of the RCW that basically applies to all property tax.
So when they, when the recommendation talks about working up to a levy rate, but how would that play into this scenario?
I have some backup slides I could show you. Because, just a couple more points here before we move on to the next slides. Councilmember Stedman pointed out that the levy rate through this 10-year projection does go down to 37 cents or almost 38 cents. To give you an idea what that 1% impact is over the 10-year period, that's about an additional $570,000 over the 10-year period. It's just 1% on the 5.9 and so on. New construction, assuming that's $75 million of new construction each year, that generates about $280,000 additional levy. So again, there's some important distinctions. Most of us here haven't been through a new property tax levy, and there's a lot of perception and a lot of things that we just need to be aware of and help educate the public. So in terms of phasing in, I'll see if I could do it without a slide. If I need a slide, I'd be glad to show the visuals. So, the council talked quite a bit about what happened to Tumwater. It lost its capacity, and it lost its capacity in the banked capacity rules. So bank capacity, in short, is you take the highest lawful limit that any taxing jurisdiction is allowed to levy, and you subtract out what the jurisdiction actually levies, and that becomes banked capacity. So that's essentially what we would do if we wanted to have the voters authorize a higher levy rate, and we would eventually move towards that. Tumwater did a 5 years at 45 cents, I believe, and then the 6 year was going to go to 75 cents. So that's one example. So the highest levy rate that would be allowed would be 75 cents in a Tumwater example, right? So since they only levied 45 cents, they banked whatever that value was in that first year. That became the banked capacity. And over that 5 years, I don't know exactly what happened in Tumwater,
They had
but
big annexation.
valuation changes.
Yeah, they had big
That
annexation.
changes that calculation, and all those checks that I talked about earlier, at some stage, they ran up against one of those limiting factors, and they ended up not being able to get the 75 cents. The same thing has happened to us. For those that were on council during the Lacey Fire District 3 annexation, the city voluntarily reduced its property tax by $4.7 million in 2011. That 4.7 became banked capacity for the city of Lacey. We took less than we could have legally. Over time, so fast forward 15 years to 2024, we lost about $1.4 million of that bank capacity just because of what happened in terms of that calculation. For us, I'm not exactly sure what happened in Tumwater in terms of not being able to get to their 75 cents. But for us, what happened is we ran up against the $3.60 levy limit. We ran into that basically in 2012, the first year after we banked the capacity. So again, the governing board sets the levy, a maximum levy based on the 1%, whether it accepts annexation, whether it accepts new construction, and that is what is certified by ordinance. And then the county takes that amount, determines assessed valuation, does the calculation, comes up with the rate. And that's where the first check comes in. They look at that rate, and they try to determine if that exceeds any limitations in state statute. And for us, in 2012, it did. So our 360 limit consists, and this is unique for Lacey, at least in this county. Our 360 is, what's included in that is the city levy, the fire district levy, and the library district levy. So the three jurisdictions must be below 360. So in 2012, when we had council adopt its new levy for 2012, the levy rate calculation ended up being about $3.90. So in 2012, it has to be 360. So the county essentially took 30 cents from Lacey to get us down to the aggregate 360. So we ended up going from a higher levy rate to a lower one. And when you multiply that by the assessed valuation that year, that's essentially what we lost in 2012. So we're currently sitting at $3.3 million of bank capacity of our 4.7 that we originally banked in 2011. So, but there are so many scenarios.
So how have we done that correctly then?
I wouldn't use correct or
Well,
incorrect.
But then,
we-
hindsight being 2020, because we meant well, right? We lowered what we were gonna collect because the fire district was gonna collect that instead.
Yeah.
Where,
Basically nothing. As much as I think of the city council, I don't think you could think your way around this. Market valuation is going to do what market valuation is going to
Exactly.
do.
There's unknown.
Other jurisdictions may increase their rate to the $1.50 maximum, which is what happened with Lacey Fire District 3. They're an independent governing body, so when they go to $1.50, that takes away from the 360. The library district could do the same thing. So really, if you think about our absolute maximum levy rate, it's $1.60. If you take out the $1.50
Because-
maximum fire district levy rate and the 50 cents maximum levy rate for the library, that's $2. They could take $2 of the 360. And that's, again, there's no wrong decision. You take a look at these projections and we make our best estimate of what may happen, and we, again, be cautious in terms of what that might look like in the future. But I guess really what I'm saying in terms of stepping up to that higher rate I think there's some caution that's involved with that. There's no guarantees as to what will happen to assessed valuation, what the other taxing jurisdictions may do. So, my recommendation would be not to do that. Pick your priorities and try to figure out how to fund that and move from that point would be my recommendation.
So at any one time, we're limited to 75 cents, okay, for any one measure. And then our, what you called our banked rate is the difference between the 75 cents and whatever we go out for. So in this case, the 45,
Well, it's the dollar amount that's important.
dollar amount, yeah.
which is based on the 30 basis points that we didn't use, multiplied by the assessed value.
In that one point in time, so that bank capacity is calculated one time.
Every 4 years.
And for us, that happens the year in which you don't take the maximum.
Sure.
There's a one-time calculation of that amount.
And that's our main caution flag.
And then from there, it gets adjusted. So it's,
Okay.
that's where you really can't predict the future.
We
It's
need to
just,
take the maximum our first year.
So
Yeah.
if we weren't going to take, Tumwater went from 45 to 75, so they went from the middle to the statutory limit. Is it, I feel like I need a piece of paper to figure this out, but is it less risky to go from 45 cents to 48 and then to 50 cents, because even at our peak, if we were going to stair step, which is the recommendation of the committee, we wouldn't be going all the way to the top, right? We would still be, we're aiming for like 50 cents.
I would love to help you mitigate the risk, but I understand that, so 2025 is Tumwater's 6th year of their Metropolitan Water District, so the year they plan to go to 75 cents. I think they got to 52 cents only, and they are at the statutory max right now, so.
But they were still able to increase. They
They
just
were.
couldn't go as high as they had intended, and they couldn't bring in as much as they had hoped.
They would, yeah.
But they had
so-
decent development in those years as well.
That's what changed it.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it did what it's supposed to do according to what it just, they thought they were gonna collect a lot more, but they.
Takes from one end, but it
Yeah.
gains from another.
So again, it's like, what we really need to think about is what the dollar amount do we want to go to, and then have that be the statutory limit at time and say it up front. And that's how you mitigate that,
Correct.
right?
Because if you look at this,
Well, essentially, it's at 6 right now.
right.
Well,
Is that enough?
So another way to look at it is the 5.9 million, or whatever's calculated when we actually have assessed valuation. That's really the floor. The way property tax is calculated and the way it's governed in Washington State, it won't go below that number unless we run into the levy rate limitation.
yeah.
So it's, I won't call it a guarantee, because
Yes.
it could go
Is the
down
number
depending on what
adequate
happens, but
at the beginning?
that's really theoretically your floor. It's not gonna go below that. That doesn't help the inflationary impacts that construction costs are going to have, but that's why you have the 1%, that's why you have new construction, that type of thing, but
So you just
And
want
this-
an adequate number, is what you want to
This,
begin with.
this floor number is based on within city limits, right?
correct.
And again, this doesn't include any annexation, and if we're not gonna continue to have the conversation of what this looks like if we do it all at once, like, I wanna know how this would affect this if we did annex, say we annexed our entire urban growth area over a 20-year period. What does that do to this rate and what we can collect? And like, I can't answer that question.
Wouldn't the cost to the voters go down?
Yeah,
For
So,
sure.
significantly.
It'd be a good thing. We can't make any promises, but yeah, if the city grows, if we annex a bunch of stuff, then individual per household cost decreases.
But how much have we annexed in the last 50 years?
Well, that's,
5%, maybe?
I mean, we haven't annexed a ton of our urban growth area.
And well, since 50 years, it'd be about actually 70%. We annexed all the northeast area in the 90s. We actually annexed all the south area in the late 80s and 90s.
Okay,
That's
but
kind of grown,
realistically-
I'm thinking over the last 20 years.
But
And
going
Thompson
forward,
Place, you know,
it's hard to predict what we're going to do for annexation of those values, because the boundaries are going to be, it's going to be an exercise, but it's not going to be it's going to be a swag exercise if we do something like that, which is informative, as long as you know what the context of it. In terms of annexation going forward, we're of course looking at an annexation study that should be wrapping up here in the next 2 months, to be able to come back and look at the whole urban growth area and how you go through an annexation strategy, and part of that includes like the Tangle Wild, Thompson Place, and as well as, East Lacey. And, again, it's an important piece, but looking at this in terms of versus a staggered versus a growth, once looking at that levy amount you want to pull in, going back to what does it need to fund those capital improvement programs at a reasonable level, that committee recommended that $5.9 million levy, which equates to that 45 cents. And again, going back to that caution area of they did recommend considering a phased approach, but as we looked more into it and found more information that Troy has researched, if you come in at 30 cents and the recommended value is 5.9, if you come in at 30 cents at 3.9, you may never realize that 5.9 going forward. But if you start that with the floor and you get a little bit more capacity, you can always look at future, the city could look at potentially the merit of a levy lid lift, which like the fire district has done that several times over the years, because they keep getting that capacity that they're able to go back out. So again, that's going to be based on voter moods and the atmosphere of the times, but those are ways that grows over time as well.
So, just as an example, over the last 12, I guess it's been about 13 years, the assessed value of the city has gone from 4 billion to 12 billion, now we're at 13 point something, right? Had we done this 12 years ago,
My point, yeah,
right?
The levy rate would have come down,
considerably.
but your overall collections would have stayed relatively straight line.
Flat.
So it's just an inverse relationship. It's a calculation is really what that is. So.
And we can take a
But
look at.
that's the whole point, is actually, it's less, it costs everyone less as we grow, but that's not something we've been very good about talking about. It's like, yeah, this snap in time, this is what it's gonna cost, but as we grow, add more assessed value, it's actually gonna cost everyone less as we grow, right?
You remember my superpower that I shared with you at last year's retreat about council dreams and optimism, but I think in terms of thinking about, the revenue, I think what's missing is the expenditure side. So in terms of the urban growth area, there's no parks amenities in there. Our parks capital improvement program doesn't include any considerations for the UGA. So that's a whole piece I think is missing from the conversation, is the lack of parks in the UGA. And there's probably going to be an expectation that there'll be parks built there that aren't in any of our numbers, any of our plans. And then the maintenance that goes along with that as well. So there's an expenditure side, and I think the county residents, they would have that expectation that that's some of that funding would go into that area and not just what currently is the city limits.
I agree, and that's why I think it's important to put on a map where everything's at. And the fact that our urban growth area is sort of like right down the middle, where we sort of follow that line right down the middle where a lot of our parks are at too. And so it's always good to put in context of all of this. But I think regardless, it's important to sort of, for information's sake, as we grow and as we annex, what that really does to that rate over time. And be able to have that information is really important for the average voter. Because there is an expectation that we will be annexing and adding that. We're just still waiting on the plan. I've been waiting on it for 16 years.
I have,
And we've had quite a few annexations over the last 16 years too. We have grown quite a bit and added quite a bit of population through annexation as well.
I have a question that I think needs to at least be talked about, and I don't think it's going to be popular at all, but it's something that we have not yet discussed. But in reality, we're asking the community for more money, and those costs are going to get passed down to community members, and it is going to go against, our visions of more affordable housing for everybody. So my main question about that is, was that factored in to the work group's decision-making during this process, kind of understanding that, like, yes, we all want these things, and it's a great use of the money, but again, still, we are, we're asking our residents to pay more, and that the landlords are going to charge more, and it's going to trickle down somehow.
Can I, okay, so our property tax distribution we're like 8% of what is collected on your property. So it's really the school, the state, and the fire department. They make up 75% of your property tax dollar. And then we as a city, you're like 7.5%, 8%. So, our effect.
I guess that the question is, what does that have effect? What does that turn that 8% to? Does it turn it to
And-
11%?
And I don't even necessarily mean that. It's $12 billion deficit for the state, and then they see us ask for money. I think this is going to get addressed by people, and this is why I think it's something to talk about. $12 billion we're in a deficit, and then now we're asking for more money. They're not going to see it as, it's only Lacey
yeah,
just
it's
asking
given
for it. It's something that we should address, and that's why we have to talk about these things.
And that's one of the things too, when we get later in it, talking about going out, is just the atmosphere in general. And there's no really good time to make this ask because it's always an issue, but also we have the atmosphere that we're going to have to work with the community, what the value is to this, and the value of what this effort is.
Well, and I agree, that is why probably this discussion is so difficult, because it's so hard for the average voter to put that into actually context of what they're paying from their property tax. In reality, it's not really affecting them that much, considering the growth that we will have and continue to have. You throw in annexation and everything, it's gonna drop that quite a bit. If we did this 12 years ago, right, I mean, that rate would have dropped probably, lower than that 37 cents for sure. If we started this 12 years ago, I mean, it'd be down. You look how low our rate has dropped. We have the lowest rate probably in the city and the state right now. So
Well,
anyway,
I'm looking at our website, and Malcolm's memory is weirdly good. Lacey's piece of the property taxes that Lacey residents pay is 7.9%, which is about 76 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So 76 cents plus 45 cents. So it's a significant increase to our proportion, but our proportion is really small.
yeah.
I totally understand, and I'm saying, that's why I say it's hard to even bring up this topic, because I'm on board with this. As long as we get the right project, like you said, we flesh out what really are the important ones that we really want to do. But that, to the voter, will not make a difference how much Lacey collects. It will just, they will see certain things, certain narratives, that, this year they're taxing us again, and this, they don't know it was Thurston or the state or what.
And-
These are just things we have to address and clarify.
But the total property tax value is $9.54 per thousand, so it would be about $10. So that doesn't seem like a huge change.
Yeah.
Like going from $9.50 to $10 and getting a bunch of nice new parks.
But
But it's $20 more per month for that house.
It's how it felt last time.
It-
They
it's-
turned
oh,
it
it's
into a
another thing
taxing,
and another thing and another thing. That's why we have to talk about this.
And it shows you the importance of making sure our talking points are correct, that there's no, I'm not sure. It's like you have to
Someone's
be
talking
very
points are
specific
correct.
about that.
What is the direct impact and benefit to the property owner, to the community? And that's very important. And going back to the comment I made earlier about just in general, these type of measures, there's no guarantees you can do everything right. But you also have the feelings and the confidence of the voters in terms of what they can do. There's a lot of still uncertainty this year because of, just both from national to statewide perspectives and conversations. However, saying that, really, there's no perfect time, and so it goes back to how do you frame it so that there's a value there that people are making that decision on.
I had a question. When we were talking about the inclusion of UGA into this circumstance situation, we were talking about a separate board. And did we talk about the makeup of that board? Was it by population or?
No, it's a 5-member board, and it can be made up 2 different ways. One is a direct election of the board members from the district, or the other one is the board's appointed by the county and the city. So you'd probably be looking at appointees from the council to represent on the board and appointees from the county. The question is, who gets to appoint that 5th member? Because
Yeah, that's what I was.
that's a challenge. It's a conversation, it's not necessarily a challenge.
Because if it was by population, it would be like 2 and 3, right? So 3 city, 2.
Well,
or-
you'd have to figure out and have this conversation on how that would be done and equitably, but also complicating that conversation is from the county's perspective, from what we heard tonight, is they're looking at issues out in the rural county of the ability to maintain those rural parks. How's that come into their equation into this conversation? And does that mean that it's a broader district than just the UGA? And there's gonna be some conversations there. The other thing I forgot to mention too, in terms of process, not only you have to have the conversations with the county, but there's also, if you have a board that's not just made up of a city, then and it has a county representation, you have to go through a banner review board process as well. And that adds another step to that effort.
And you lose control.
Well, not necessarily, not if the majority of the board is, is appointed by the city, is control. And all it is an interlocal agreement to approve a budget every year. It's not like they're making a bunch of decisions. But again, the question is what is the assessed value of our urban growth area? And what is the effect of that on this initial levy rate?
Can I make some assumptions to
Sure.
maybe help you formulate that?
Oh, your mic's not on.
I feel pretty strongly that, sorry. In terms of trying to just give you an idea what impacts might be based on theoretical assessed valuation. So I feel pretty confident that the assessed valuation of the city limits is more than our UGA. So let's just assume it's half, roughly half. So if I had $6 billion of assessed valuation as just a guess in terms of what assessed valuation might be in the UGA, getting the same 5.942 million, that levy rate drops to about 31 cents.
Nice.
So I could plug in any number you want. If you
Yeah.
want to plug in 9 billion
Well,
for the UGA.
The thing is it's a pretty easy question to answer because the assessor will go and do a GeoNet around the urban, and you just have to ask the question.
Sure.
And they'll give us the information. And again, that could dramatically, it's like, if we're all in it together, it can cost us all less. Yeah, there's a bunch of other steps, but it's at least, I think, worth having the conversation. Maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but I'd like to have that information before we make a final recommendation on how this goes forward.
Well, it's like the garbage contract. We pay a lot more because we're subsidizing the residents in the county.
Yeah.
Where if we just paid for us only, it'd be a lot cheaper.
And are we looking to just collect that 5.9 million, or was the 45 cents just the $225 per month that they felt was, affordable to a household? So what was it, chicken and the egg there? Which one came
Jen
first?
can talk about how the work group
Yeah.
worked through that process,
Yeah.
because I think they looked at a couple different levy rates, so.
Well, while Troy still has the calculator running, Troy, if you add the 6 billion and you leave it at 45 cents, then where are we?
A lot of money. It would be more like
8.6 million. Sorry, 8.6 million.
Thank you.
Because I said, I would assume that it was more the rate than the total amount in the end that they were.
I think they
concerned
were
with.
looking for how much is it gonna cost to do our priorities, and that's what they came up with the rate, right?
Yeah, so, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, when they looked at the 45 cents, it was close to funding those top 5 new projects, and then also able to cover some of the M&O items that the city needs replaced. They also, they had discussion and concern about what voters would pass, but what would fund projects. Discussion bounced between 45 cents and 47 cents. They talked about the fact that Olympia's is 50 cents and Tumwater's 32, or maybe it's vice versa. It was noted that 45 cents is kind of between those two current rates. They talked about, just affordability to the average household. And
It's so hard
I
because,
think those were the
again,
main,
it's really not about the rate, it's about how much money do you want to raise? And because then we know the rate immediately is gonna change, that's gonna be the floor, but it's most likely gonna go down as we grow. So it's like, how much money do we really need to bring in to do our projects? And then what's the best way to cover that?
So how much money?
We asked this committee to do this work, and so if they think 45 is good, I think 45 is good.
Well, it's for consideration for sure.
So, I think we need to get some more information, a little bit, to look at what the effect of the UGA assessed value would have on this conversation. Get something of a little bit more, see if we can reach out to the assessor's office, see if they can give us a firmer number what that assessed valuation is.
The other thing I think is important is I've had some side conversations with some commissioners about this and say, hey, what's your thought? What are you thinking? And they're like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from. I understand that, but that's non-majority of the commission, and this is a timing deal as well. And so, like, if this really is gonna, I mean, I know staff, you can make it go forever and it will never come to a consensus, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting to, like, if we got a political commitment, what could actually be a turnaround time? If you just sort of leave it that, oh, here's a process, it could take forever and ever.
Well,
But,
and this is something too, we can have, we can also revisit it in a couple of weeks at the retreat as well, so we can get some more information and also hone in on that process. And ultimately though, I don't know if this relates to both a UGA-wide or just a city, but just kind of get a sense of what the council's feeling in terms of a levy amount and what that associated rate is and impact. And I heard from, some that the 45 cents may be palatable. Just kind of get a sense.
In this 6 million neighborhood and the 45-cent rate, it seems.
I know we can come back and talk about the broader governance structure and the boundaries, but just kind of get a sense of where this council sits in terms of this levy amount.
Would it be possible to get kind of timeline information on, okay, these projects will probably take, 18 months to complete, and these ones are more like a 3 or 4 year? I think that would help with some of those,
We can do some
determining what the
ballpark.
priorities are.
We can also
Even
do-
just
yeah.
ballpark, something there.
But the other challenge, there's so many, again, like everything, there's so many different factors that
Yeah.
go into it, but, and some of them are what are opportunity driven, meaning
Sure.
outside of,
Yeah.
most of the out of our control and what are in our control too. Okay. Thank you.
Do you want to look at the guidance, election guidance?
Yep, that's what we're getting to next. So that's 2 questions down. That's a good conversation, and even though they're not, we're moving the ball. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about election dates and potential dates. And of course, as it's talked throughout the, kind of threads to this, it's a difficult time to go out for a formation of a new taxing district and that tax rate. And there are several considerations that need to be, think about as we go through this. And some of the things we just kind of put up there as staff is, in order to have as successful a chance as possible on a ballot measure, the chance of it most successful is we got to have time to develop the ballot resolution, make sure the language right, make sure it's clear. You also got to build off the momentum of the community engagement themes that we've heard, as well as the work group. And, there's a lot of time to get the community informed and get support from the community. And then also, one of the things we want to try to do is have the ability to, bring on even an election consultant to help us with the communications and maybe look at doing some survey work, similar to what we did before in advance of the last measure that, in 2019. Other things about election timing is when do you run it? What's the best time? There's generally 5 or 4 times a year, a couple of special elections, and then your primaries and generals. So one of the things we've been thinking about and kind of make sure the council's thinking about is we do have a very important ballot measure that's going to be coming up in the end of 2026, early 2027. At the latest is a renewal of our transportation benefit district. And we've seen the success of that transportation benefit district and the value there. So we want to make sure that we're not having competing interests there. Also,
Is that 20 bips?
it's, it's 2%,
Is it 20?
it's 2%, right?
20 bips.
2/10.
2/10%, yeah.
Cost of a ballot, because if you run it as you only measure on a special election, we're paying the full freight. If you run it with, at the time there's multiple ballot issues, then it reduces our overall cost. But also with that, if you have it running with multiple ballot issues, such as a primary or special elections, there could be competing interests on that as well. So, and we took a look at some possible dates in 2025, because that's been the goal for a couple of years now, is kind of targeting 2025 as an opportunity to consider this again. And we looked at the dates for election cycle. And so we have this year, April is the first opportunity for a special ballot. August, which is the primary. Then we'll have November as a general, and then potentially February of 2026. You can go back one.
I'm in favor of August.
I think, as we kind of talked about this, and Yeah, because April's a little too soon to do, even if we're just going on our own. It's very difficult to pull everything together and get community support. August, it is a primary, but it's also, you may not have as many competing interests at that point in time as you would in the general. And you start getting into 2026, you start losing connection with your work group effort and your community engagement effort, and it's going out further. So August is that day that, if we go in 2025, is something that I think gives us, it's still tight, but it gives us more opportunity to put a strategy together, the ballot title. I think the date for the resolution to be filed is May 2nd. So it gives time to work with council, some of these issues we talked about tonight, to kind of hone in and get a little bit more specific and aligned. And then also allows time for engagement. It also, we start having community events occurring, so there's opportunity to also have some informational out of those events using our parks and facilities as well. So I heard August
for me,
already,
it's a
but just kind of
no-brainer.
some thoughts on some of the pros and cons for the council sees and opportunities.
Well, I think August makes the most sense if we're going to keep it within the city limits. If we're going to
Favor that too.
look at extending this into the urban growth area, it's going to need more time because, I mean, I'm trying to picture if I were a county commissioner and I was looking at just one piece of the county, well, then what happens to their other parks? What happens in the northwest? What happens in the southern part of the county? So I think they're going to have to look big picture as well, and it's just going to take time. And
I think the conversation with county is obviously pretty, and obviously important, and the determining factor here. Between August or November, I mean, can you tell me about the potential delayed property tax to 2027 for November ballot?
So by state law, we had to certify property tax by November 30th. I'm not sure that with a November election, we'd have to wait till the election is validated, I think is the word I'm looking for. That's usually 2 to 3 weeks after the election. You would have to put together the board, the governance of the board in order to actually adopt the property tax for the next year. I don't know, it could be done in November is really my point. So you may have a week at best to wait till the election is validated, set up your governance, and then adopt an ordinance in order to levy the property tax in 2026. And you only have one time a year to change property tax, and that's November.
That's November.
When did the last one go on the ballot?
2018.
But what time of year?
It was a special election.
Yeah, it was in April.
It was November.
No, it was
wasn't
November.
It was
Oh, was it?
November,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was it?
November 2018.
I see the pros and cons of the August a lot. I just worry that if you get a few people who end up being really against it, and it's a low turnout, then they can drive a lot of people to disproportionately,
Well,
at least a concern.
I mean,
you know?
I think one of the bigger concerns is that also this is an election year too.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
the other factor.
There's a lot of unknowns with the election year. And so it's, we can get people who are running against this, and it will have a major effect on this as well. So
Well-
that's what's tough about it.
When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about it kind of simply. What time of year do people use the parks the most?
That part.
Summer.
That's,
Right? And so people are going to be out in our parks, seeing how beautiful they are, and we can use those opportunities to say, expanding this, improving this is what you'd be paying for. So I feel like August is a strategically good time because people will be in our parks right before the vote.
that's exactly why I'm in favor of August as well.
Yeah,
Because of the leverage that
definitely.
we get from the summer weather. I mean, our parks are full in the summer. It's like a desert in December and January, but in the summertime, they're just full. And so then we come Very rarely are we asking the public for any money, and here we are saying, hey, would you like to see better parks? At this time, at that August timeframe, because come November and they're getting ready for Thanksgiving and Christmas, they've forgotten about the parks, right? But while they're using them, I think the iron is hot.
Can we do events or promote it at the Sway night markets, or is that
That's a set, totally, the election is a totally separate thing that's not, our council's not involved in.
Yeah.
I just meant if they can give out information there, is that not?
And that's one of the things too, as we go forward in this process, we'll have some conversations and education about the rules around elections and the city, what the city's role is at, and what the community role is. Because there are some very clear lines that the city cannot, we can't campaign. We can only provide information. And that goes for in council meetings as well. So, but we'll have some more conversation about that. I'm looking at Dave, because we've talked about a little bit about when to have that, just to make sure everybody knows the rules and that we don't have any missteps.
I mean, I definitely think, right now, August is what we should be shooting for, and, you know, we just have a little more information we need to gather and make some decisions too on what the first priority projects are gonna be. You know, what can we get for information around those projects, what they look like, so they can be explained. You know, and then I think the big thing is I'm still curious of what the assessed value of and what that does to this whole thing going forward, because it could dramatically cut the cost, you know, for everyone, but there's some risks there as well, so.
Yep, and so we'll, just to recap, we'll look at the project list and identify which are, you know, Lacey specifically controlled and low-hanging fruit, look at some of the timing of those, and then what are those would be more, have to require partnerships and maybe have as a different category. We'll look at the assessed value of the UGA, and I said project timing, and then we'll also get more, if we look at the conversation around the UGA as a piece of this, then we'll also get a timeline of what that key or required steps would be to accomplish that.
Okay.
Okay.
That'll be, it needs to be compact and move quickly if we're,
Going back to the conversation with August as being a strategic date
Right.
for the city, as we've been going into this conversation about a city only.
Right.
That's where, if we expand that, we're going to have to relook at those dates, because we won't be able to do it within that amount of time.
right,
We should
exactly.
leverage that study that came out a week after the last election in 2018 too, that shows everybody wants to come here.
Okay, well, I think we have a outline of what our next steps are, and with that, is there anything else for the good of the order?
I just want to thank you. I just want to say thank you to council. It's a great conversation tonight. I want to thank Jen and Jenny and Troy and the rest of the staff and everybody back there, Jamie, and everybody's put into this in the last 2 or 3 weeks to pull this information together. So appreciate everybody's work.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, and with that, without objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned.